Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I hope all my tech is working. I've been um, really stressed out before the beginning of the stream um, because I just came under the heaviest fucking storm imaginable. Okay, I was worried about my sound because OBS is kind of showing me weird stuff, but okay, my sound is working. Already see some people in the chat, seeing some likes coming in. Thank you guys so much. You guys are why I'm doing this. To everyone in the Discord posting stuff for me to stream about, to just talk stuff for us to discuss in general. To everyone, even on Twitter, sometimes going a little bit nuts about certain tech topics and inspiring me to provide my own 2 cents. To even people like Drew from Tailosive Tech posting absolutely diabolically stupid takes and kind of making me want to respond to them. Yesterday was a really fun stream for me, even though I absolutely hated basically every minute of the actual Google I/O event. Like, quite honestly, I don't even remember 80% of it afterwards. Like, I remember broad shit like Google Omni, all the changes to Google Search, and honestly, a lot of the more interesting stuff has been coming out afterwards. Like, for example, the fact that Android 17 is getting at least at first software support because there's no hardware acceleration for it yet, but support for H.266. Basically, the successor to H.265 and H.264. So really cool stuff. I honestly thought Google would kind of forgo all that stuff and mostly focus on AV2 as the successor to AV1. So pretty interesting stuff. There's also been like details about how they're hardening security on Androids and all that interesting stuff. For some reason, though, the main Google I/O keynote had none of that, focused entirely on AI, repeated a bunch of shit over and over again, basically regurgitated stuff that has been announced numerous times at this point. But because I was going a little bit schizo on that, at least it seemed like you guys were enjoying my reactions to it. I wasn't face palming as much, but that's probably for the best. My skin gets red quite easily. Today we are talking primarily about Apple stuff, as I have promised yesterday. None of it is breaking news anymore because that's stuff that I've been preparing now for 2 or 3 days to stream about, but I still hope it's interesting. It's all coming up in the build up to WWDC, which is of course in the beginning of June. And as I promised, I will be live streaming WWDC itself, so hopefully we can all just basically do enjoy it together, have as much information for it as possible. I already see Max posting something in the chat a while ago saying probably won't be able to join tonight. What else is new? Yeah, I know. It's like the same thing happens to me with all my favorite streamers. For example, I'm a pretty big fan of the streamer Loner Box. I just saw that he was streaming live. I cannot watch him live, but I can watch his videos either as VODs or even as edited stuff. And as I promised, I will provide more edited stuff down the road, especially for the WWDC content on this channel. And Max Maximus also sending a membership milestone for 22 months, saying crazy to think I have been here for almost 2 years. It's crazy that anyone is a MarkTech Pro Max level supporter for 2 years. I think that you basically joined like a month or so after I announced the tiers, and yeah, you've been absolutely steadfast. Thank you for your amazing support. I see my one loyal German viewer, Jan, saying Guten Tag, Herr Marktag. Guten Tag zurück. Good day to you, sir. And you said that the Google I/O keynote, I assume you're referring to, made you drowsy, made you want to sleep. Well, I at some point I was, it was ironic. I wasn't actually falling asleep, but I was doing like this one, literally. At the end, especially by the time they really started repeating themselves, because there's only so often that they can say our AI is upgraded from Gemini 3.1 to Gemini 3.5. Here's the Flash version. Here's Omni. here is how multimodal it is. Here it is creating photos. Here it is creating videos. And I'm like, okay, get on with it. And then they ended on like those smart glasses without even a display, basically doing what Meta did 2 years ago. And this is not like me having different standards. When Apple announces smart glasses that won't have a display, which is the current rumor, I won't give a shit about it. In fact, I'll be probably really cringing during the event. Like, and I'm not getting them. Like, I swear to you. Like, if some of you want to send them to me to analyze them live and review them, and I can send them even back, that's a different topic. We can arrange some stuff if that's convenient to you. But, and obviously, if Apple wants to sponsor a review, which they definitely won't be doing. But yeah, I'm not buying these kinds of glasses. Once they have a smart display and I can actually see a good UI or anything, I don't know, maybe something absolutely revolutionary happens in the meantime and it will absolutely change my mind on display-free glasses. But for now, I think it's laughable. Yeah. And before we fully immerse ourselves into all the more juicy Apple content today, I want to give you a plea to do all the YouTube jazz, as we call it around here. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, and comment live, comment later in the regular comment section. I love getting your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements, your suggestions for further content. So that would help a lot. You can also make your chat in the live chat a super chat or a super sticker if you want to support me financially or send a membership milestone, because if you are a channel supporter here on YouTube, shout out to all our MarkCheck Pro and MarkCheck Pro Max members, you can send membership milestones, of course, and you can also alternatively support us over on Patreon. Jan saying, yeah, like the event was a little bit like reheated food, to say the least. So I'm gonna make myself a little bit smaller. You have to forgive me for sweating today. We've been having a lot of humidity building up since yesterday, but because we had that crazy ass storm that I came under before I got home, it got 10 times more humid. It's absolutely insane. And I'm not keeping the window open because the absolute intensity of sound would just drown it out, even with a good microphone. So yeah, it's absolutely insane right now. Yeah, but that's about it for all the preamble. Before I do get into all the news, because if you want to have a look, this is all the stuff that I had prepared already, most of it yesterday, some of it I added right before the stream. So we do have quite a lot of Apple news today. However, I do actually want to start with something that just caught my eye yesterday, and that is Drew from Tailosive Tech posting, "I finally get the iPad now," and it's such an deliberate attempt at misunderstanding the product category, misappreciate or underappreciating at the very least all the things that it has contributed back to iPhone, especially soon with the foldable iPhone, to the Mac. There's a lot of weirdness, and I honestly I feel like Drew is almost like a scorned lover, because he used to say that like the iPad Pro's like, if not the, but one of his absolute most favorite Apple products. That's why I originally really started watching and appreciating Drew, because I shared and I keep that opinion. But he, over time, just kind of became an iPad hater. And now he's posting a video very much like trying to appeal to some old Steve Jobs quotes. It's not outright hateful, but it is silly, and I think it is deliberately trying to misinterpret some signs of what Apple is doing, how the community is reacting. It also is counter to what you see actually on even like Apple's balance sheet. The iPad is keeps doing really well, usually keeps up with the Mac, depending on, of course, the quarter. Sometimes, obviously, when Apple launches new Macs, the Mac is ahead. Sometimes when Apple launches new and especially more expensive iPads, the iPad generates more revenue. That's, of course, really impressive, considering that iPads on average are way cheaper than Macs, which means Apple sells a lot more of them than Macs. but that's neither here nor there. Let's see what Drew has to say about the iPad in 2026 and in less than 6 minutes. As always, guys, before we start, let me know what the audio and video quality is like for you, if there are any issues with the stream itself, if I am too loud or Drew is too loud or the music is too loud or anything like that. I always want to keep it all nice and balanced for everyone. And after many adieus, let's get started.
How are we going to communicate this? We don't want to carry around a mouse, right? So what are we going to do? Oh, a stylus, right? We're going to use a stylus. No. No. Who wants...
Oh God, I hate this so much because Drew himself actually commented on this correctly in the past. The stylus jab on the iPhone. First of all, the iPhone is a very small screen. Interacting on it with a stylus is already a way different idea than doing it with the iPad. The other point is it's only a stylus, right? Which requires a very different UI than from the large touch targets that we are used to now because of multi-touch. It obviously does, if the screen itself is only designed for the stylus, it doesn't give you the multi-touch with the gestures and everything, especially now that we're in the post-iPhone 10 era. But the point is, the Apple Pencil, the main point, the Apple Pencil for the iPad Pro is not really a stylus for interacting with the UI. In fact, there is a ton of general UI stuff that does precisely not work well. In fact, I would actually argue it works too poorly with the Apple Pencil. Something like swiping down for notification center and control center, that's something you have to do with your finger. It's something that your Apple Pencil simply doesn't support. We have Rosa joining the chat saying hello back. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, I know. The iPad was actually in development before the iPhone. I know that sounds contradictory because the iPhone obviously came out in 2007 while the iPad came out in 2010, but the iPad was originally much closer to Apple's heart in a way because it was a continuation of the Newton, right? It was a slimmed down new idea of like a portable PC. Trying a phone was much more radical for Apple and required a lot of different ideas from everything they had done before, especially focusing on cellular, having to be much more careful with battery life over time. It also involved like, well, how good do we have to make the camera? Because obviously that kind of seems to be a good form factor for it in a way that maybe even an iPad isn't. And unfortunately, some people still think that the iPad should be a really great camera powerhouse. But yeah, the iPad was first in development, and it is where multi-touch was ultimately created, or what it was created for. And then the iPhone came about it. And the reason why the first iPad was what it was is because it just, at that point, it was like, okay, we have already multi-touch. We are currently working on an iPhone chip, the A4, that's much more powerful, much more custom in-house. Not fully in-house at that point, though. And we have all of that expertise that we had developing this kind of tablet, I guess, right? Because the tablet PC wasn't actually a term that people used very positively. Many people associated it with very sluggish devices that you had to interact with a touch screen, with a stylus, right? This is the baggage that Apple confronted with the launch of the original iPhone, but that work had been brewing up for the iPad. It just so happened that the iPhone launched, it became a really big thing. Apple had this big idea with the App Store, so there was all hands on deck. The iPhone sold really well the first generation, but maybe not quite as at the peak of what Apple might have expected. So it essentially resulted in Apple redesigning the iPhone quickly, making it cheaper with the iPhone 3G, giving it much faster cellular capabilities, and from there it's just another 2 years then to the first iPad. So yeah, the iPad is great. I see you're saying you love your iPad Air. I love my iPad Pro. I feel like people just refuse. Like Steve himself was of two minds on certain things. Like, for example, he wasn't a fan of the idea of an iPad Mini, right? He said you would have to like trim down your fingers, not your nails or whatever, right? But make your fingers artificially smaller. But of course, that wasn't true if you think about it, which also goes to the point that Steve isn't always right. And when people, like, it's not that iPad Mini is the perfect iPad. It's not, in my opinion. But obviously, if you can hit your touch target on your phone, you can very likely do that on an 8-inch 4:3 aspect ratio multi-touch screen as well. So the fact that Steve here, for one, is criticizing styli, which is the correct plural for stylus, look it up, it has to do with styluses or styli, whatever. I said it correctly and then immediately said it wrong. I guess my brain is more fried than I thought. It's because the styli, they were forced upon you. They were the main ways to interact with the touchscreens on like a Palm Pre of the day, and the tablet PCs of the day, right? And they had ridiculously small targets because their user interface was taken from something like Windows XP. I guess at that point would be more like Windows Vista, right? That is what Apple was shitting on. It wasn't the idea of a pencil-like device that allows you to draw, allows you to take notes. And Drew will acknowledge that, but I just want to say, people can use Steve kind of how people use the Bible or the Torah or the Quran, like, or whatever other religious book you want to comment on, right? And they will take individual quotes, take them completely out of the context of their time and the specific person sometimes who is speaking, and they will just go absolutely bananas about it. Whatever.
The stylus.
Apple Pencil.
The iPhone and the Mac and many other Apple products over the past decade
bought
have come
the
a
most
long
delicious
way. There's been
strawberries.
many changes,
I'll be eating them,
upgrades,
I'm sorry.
fundamentally. Even in pretty recent years, you know, the dynamic island fundamentally changed the way multitasking.
Okay, so it didn't. Whatever. You can have live activities on the screen. Like, it happens to be that it's integrated in the dynamic island, but it could be anything else as well. Now, would it work quite as well? No, probably not, at least not in the confined current aspect ratio of the smartphones that Apple has. Though, of course, we know that they will have to work because guess which devices won't have a dynamic island? It's the iPhone freaking Fold. And guess which devices do have nice multitasking without it as well? It's the iPad, it's the Mac. So Drew is a little bit too simplistic here, trying to pretend like there have been more revolutionary stuff happening with the iPhone than it really did in the last couple of years. Like, the last revolutionary user interface change for the iPhone was the iPhone 10. And around the same time, iPads, a year later, for the iPhone it happened in 2017. For the iPad it happened in 2018. Apple removed the home button as well. It wasn't as necessary on the iPad because the iPad always, by the way, had great multitasking. It required a lot more fingers than by the time we reached what would it be at that point? iOS 12, 13, iPad OS, the first generation of iPad OS and stuff like that, right? But you can already see that Drew is trying to be a bit like, oh, see what has been happening on iPhone and Mac? But like by the same logic, like I would argue less things have been or fewer things have been happening with the Apple Watch than with the iPad. We haven't had a completely game-changing screen on the Apple Watch since I would argue Gen 4, Series 4. Maybe you can argue Series 7 when it got even bigger and got even smaller bezels. And then we got a big design change with the Ultra. But honestly, the Ultra is kind of like me right now. It's a little bit scruffy looking, right? If you're a Star Wars fan, it's a little bit like a scruffy looking nerf herder, right? How Leia insults Han. I'm such a nerd. I apologize. Like the iPad is so elegant. It doesn't need to change as much as some other Apple products. Benveni joined the stream saying hello. Just coming here to say hi, lol. Yeah, it's like I know that this happens. Like it's because so many people are disconnected from my time zone in a way. Like even people who live in England or something, that's an hour time difference, but that is enough, right? Sometimes it's an hour earlier, so some people are just coming off from work when I start streaming. They have to do their household stuff, their family stuff. Obviously, if you're in the US, you're still at work. And then other people who might watch me from regions like India, for you, it can be so late that it's now closer to bedtime. So this is why the majority of my views still come from VODs. And I'm very grateful to everyone who's watching afterwards. But a big special thank you to anyone who takes the time to at least say hello, tune in live for a couple of seconds. It helps tremendously. I promise you that.
Works with background activities, and similarly with the Mac, we've seen a huge course correction going away.
Yes, because the Mac needed a course correction. It actually had faulty parts in a way. I still would argue that the butterfly keyboard controversy was a little bit overstated, especially by the time we reached the last generation of the butterfly keyboard. It's good that Apple moved away from it. In fact, in feel, I actually prefer the Magic Keyboard keys, and I prefer the slightly higher travel as well. But overall, like the problems with the MacBook were multifold. The Intel chips got hot and got poor, at least by Apple standards, battery life, right? He will also mention something about battery life on the iPad, which again is a weird thing that Apple does, but I don't understand why Drew chooses to comment on the tech specs side rather than the actual tests. We'll get to that. But yeah, the iPad got a ton of changes because the iPad was in a way worse state than the iPad. And it needed more change, but still the iPad got a ton of change from the mini to the big to the iPad Pro, like the original 2015 A9X iPad Pro that also introduced the Apple Pencil, one of my favorite iPads of all time. The iPad progressively over the years got thinner, from the original iPad to the iPad 2 to the first iPad Air to the iPad Air 2 to the 2018 iPad Pro to now the M4 and M5 tandem OLED iPad Pros. The iPad was one of the first Apple product. In fact, I believe we are talking about the very first Apple product to get ProMotion, the 2017 iPad Pro, right? Apple keeps on updating and refining the Apple Pencil, which this video is partially about. Apple keeps improving the Magic Keyboard, which is pricey, but then again, I still work close to where my med school was. And in the cafes, I see obviously a lot of med students just taking a break. Basically, all of them either have Macs or iPads, and a ton of the people who have iPads have Magic Keyboards. So yeah, absolutely. And I would argue the split between Macs and iPads is probably like 60-40 in favor of the Mac. But then I would say that almost a third of the people who have iPads have like an actual Magic Keyboard. So yeah. I don't think that people have forsaken the iPad as much as Drew might make it out to be.
From the butterfly keys, the touch bar, bringing back legacy ports and making laptops thicker and chunkier with better thermal systems. Not the Johnny...
Which, by the way, I would argue that the iPad needs a little bit of that. Now, there can be specific reasons for it. Like, I would argue if you actually wanted to give the iPad more ports, you would, because the iPad is so thin at this point, you would need to make it a little bit thicker, because if you introduce a second part in the chassis that's basically hollowed out and creates another structural weakness point, you would have to either just create a ton of layers for strength and durability inside, which kind of defeats the point because that would make also the iPad thicker and heavier, or you just make it a little bit thicker and maybe you put the port on a very different height level or on the other side, but hopefully not symmetrical, because that would make it actually really easy to fold along that line. Yeah, but the iPad primarily in terms of thermals and performance, what it needs, the iPad Pro needs a vapor chamber. But hey, so does the MacBook Air. It's not a unique shortcoming of the iPad. Benveni saying I'm gonna watch it later. Take off, whatever. I want to say take the evening off. It's not work, obviously. Yeah, thank you so much. Whether you're watching live or later, it all means a lot to me. But if you're watching later, leave a comment in the comment section. Only like 3 or 4 people regularly comment, and thank you. You're doing the Lord's work. But to everyone, if you're enjoying the live streams, and especially if you like commenting live, please also comment afterwards.
The Apple we thought we knew, and yet the iPad continues to have an identity crisis. It still has its uses, don't get me wrong. There's still a lot of people who love their iPads and enjoy them, but in terms of noticeable improvements or changeovers of design philosophy or functionality, it's been somewhat consistent from the beginning, and maybe that's intentional, but you can't help but notice the more and more iPhones develop over time and the more and more Macs develop, the iPad becomes increasingly difficult to justify. See, in the beginning, the iPad was a much larger display than what you could get on the iPhone, because at the time of the iPad's introduction, the largest iPhone display was about 4 inches, barely. But that, of course, has changed pretty drastically over the years. Now, iPhones are getting close to 7-inch displays, which, aspect ratios aside, is...
Okay, so this is one stupid comment. You cannot do aspect ratios aside. Aspect ratios are a way bigger portion than inches of, well, they're equally a big part of the equation, just from the Pythagorean theory. Sorry, I don't use that word in English much. That's this Pythagoras in German. Just so you guys know, I know my math. It's like that aspect ratio is really, really important. I'm sorry. And the 7.9-inch original iPad mini, much less now the 8.3-inch iPad mini. And of course, if we look now at the 11-inch base iPad, or 10.9-inch, however you want to round it up or down, they're still way, way larger. There's the reason, like, guys, do you really think it has to do, like, do you think Apple wants to so artificially limit the iPhone by not giving it multitasking? Or ask yourself, do you think that Apple might not just actually believe that multitasking on a 19.5 by 9 aspect ratio screen will actually be pretty crappy? Well, unless that screen is, of course, like an ultra-wide monitor or something like that, and much larger than the iPhone. Then multitasking is great on it. But yeah, there is a reason why even on the iPad mini, Apple allows full multitasking, but not on the iPhone. And that's because the aspect ratio makes the screen significantly larger.
It's honestly not that different from what the original iPad display was at 9.7 inches, and frankly, the form factor hasn't changed that drastically.
Yeah, but this is because the iPad was closer to its final vision than the iPhone was, right? That was the entire point. Even the way Apple always described it as this magical sheet of glass that disappears while you're interacting with it, right? You can already see what Apple would need to do. It's just slimmer bezels, and in the pursuit of slimmer bezels, find a UI way to remove the home button. In fact, from the very beginning, the iPad, well, by iOS 5, Apple had multitasking gestures in the iPad because they wanted you to use your fingers all over it. The iPhone is like 10-finger multi-touch, but try fitting 10 fingers even on an iPhone 17 Pro Max, right? Not into that, not inside the iPhone, on it. And even that is still crappy. Try that with an iPad mini, it's not ideal. Try that with a 9.7-inch iPad, now we're in the business. Try that with an 11-inch iPad and without any risk of hitting like a home button or something. And now you actually, and obviously you are rarely ever going to use 10 fingers. You're probably going to even type more like this on the software keyboard. But, and then think about the 12.9-inch iPad. Think about the potential foldable iPad that's going to be 18 inches when unfolded. Now, mind you, at that point, it could run macOS, but it would most likely be a touch-optimized macOS.
There's some smaller ones, there's some bigger ones, but the best-selling iPad is still in that same ballpark of the original dimensions.
Again, and this is like, by that logic, you could also say like, oh, but the iPhone 17 is currently outselling the iPhone 17 Pro Max. So, and 6.3 inches, while still significantly larger than 3.5, is closer to that. Like, who cares, right? There are 13-inch iPads for those who want. There are 8-inch iPads for those who want. The entire point of the iPad's existence is versatility and options.
Later this year, we're also going to be seeing...
Even in the beginning, like, yes, Apple over time started running ads like, what's a computer, right? And I think this collectively broke the minds of so many Mac purists and people who, and even some iPad diehards who actually thought, oh, now the iPad will get macOS, or at least all its features, right? So it's basically going to be macOS and everything but name. And neither side was satisfied. Well, the 80% of the market, right? Let's say both extremes represent 10%. But meanwhile, 80% just kept buying the iPads because they were like, oh, that's a cool product. Does it do email and web browsing? Oh, it's getting more multitasking features. Oh, great. It has a few games for me to play. Oh, very nice. It has the cameras for me to scan my documents. Cool. Oh, it has accessories for me to draw, to take my notes. Oh, accessories to also like type fast with a good integrated keyboard while still preserving like that premium Apple look and feel. Great, right? And like...
the first folding iPhone, where now...
But then what will happen with the foldable iPad? Also, what would happen if Apple called this device an iPad, right? Would we now say that the iPad surpassed the iPhone in a way? Because now the iPad does everything the iPhone does, but better, right? It's just a question of perspective. In fact, one thing we should be grateful about is because Apple now has 1.5 decades worth of experience on larger multitasking devices, and even well over a decade, like 12, 13 years of experience even with iPad minis, which means that they will have a pretty great UI right out of the gate for the foldable iPhone, right? So this is something where Apple benefits from the iPhone existing, and even if you're not a great fan of the iPad, now you should be grateful that the iPad has existed for so long, that so many apps on the App Store have been optimized for it, for its 4:3 aspect ratio screen, for its larger screen, for its multitasking capabilities. Where you should be giving a plus to the iPad, he's basically saying, oh no, it's negative.
Even incorporating for that 4:3 aspect ratio, the iPhone is going to start borrowing some more iPad-like functionality. And for years, one of the main advantages of going with a bigger screen like the iPad was you could have split-screen multitasking. But now, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it turns out that the folding iPhone...
Oh my god, this crease is so atrocious.
Gains yet another iPadOS feature as both the iPhone and Mac inch closer in on the iPad's market share. Before, you know, an iPad was an easy sell because it was much cheaper than a Mac, but now with the MacBook Neo in the room...
So the touchscreen MacBook, we'll have to see what that OS is even like. What will happen if Apple only brings it to like $2,000 MacBook Pros and higher, right? how much of a competitor to $350 iPads is that actually going to be? Even if it does support the Apple Pencil, right? And especially on a device that very likely is not going to be like a 360 hinged display like some convertibles on Windows laptops and stuff like that. And yeah, the MacBook Neo is a great product. I mean, I talk about it all the time. I helped a very important person in my life buy it, set it up and everything. But it's still a Mac. It's still with all the positives, right? But it also is a desktop PC with a more complicated file system versus what the iPad has, with less native apps where you much more often have to do web apps and stuff like that, where you have more stuff to configure in settings, especially because you are constantly downloading apps that are outside of the App Store, just with the nature of the beast and everything of the market. Like, yeah, that's the MacBook Neo. It has all the advantages and disadvantages of a Mac.
That argument isn't as strong as it used to be. Yes, you can still get a 10-inch iPad for much cheaper than a MacBook Neo, but if you want a keyboard and trackpad and Apple Pencil...
But you don't need all of the... First of all, why do you need the Folio if the keyboard already functions as a Folio here? He's also using the more expensive Apple Pencil. You can use the USB-C $80 Apple Pencil, which you can very often get discounted for like $65 and stuff like that. Again, Magic Keyboard Folio. It's a decent accessory. I'm not gonna harp on it too much, but many people who are buying this kind of iPad, like many people who I've went to med school with, like they just typed on the software keyboard for the most part. Some even took notes with their fingers. And of course, there's a long-term investment here, right? Now, the Magic Keyboard Folio might not be compatible with all future versions of the iPad, but depending on what iPad you buy and what Apple Pencil it's compatible with at that moment, you can have several generations of iPad that will work with your given Apple Pencil. Like, the original Apple Pencil has been introduced in 2015. We're now in 2026, and there have been 3 generations of Apple Pencil, right? Apple Pencil first generation, Apple Pencil second generation, and Apple Pencil Pro. And then Apple Pencil USB-C is like a cheaper alternative to Apple Pencil 2 and Pro, right? It stands to reason that with iPads being updated on an 18-month basis, if in over 11 years, Apple has, or in 11 years, Apple has only introduced 3 pencils, you can buy an iPad and then an iPad a few years later and still use the same Apple Pencil. Depending on what form factor you might get, your same case might fit, or at least your folio might fit and stuff like that. In an ideal scenario, sometimes maybe even your keyboard accessory will fit. And hey, if you get yourself a more wireless setup with like a Bluetooth keyboard and stuff like that, well, that's going to be infinitely reusable. And again, I'm not saying that now makes the iPad A16 a better deal than the MacBook Neo, just from the chip and RAM amount and everything. Here, the MacBook Neo is actually superior in ways that go beyond like the operating system and the form factor and everything. But it's like, this is a dishonest pitch, at least in my opinion.
To go along with it, honestly, not all that different in price. And later this year, not only are we seeing the first folding iPhone, but we're likely going to be seeing the first large touchscreen MacBook available as well, meaning that even the large touchscreen argument may not last much longer as the iPad exclusive feature. So this got me thinking about what the iPad really is. It's not allowed to have over 10-hour battery life.
Okay, so the iPad absolutely does have over 10-hour battery life. The reason why Apple gives this 10-hour battery life number is because I would argue the iPad, because it is so mobile and because it's used in so many different ways, Apple is a little bit careful in what they try to advertise as standard usage of the iPad, which means that sometimes you're going to use your iPad in a much brighter environment. You're going to ramp up your screen brightness and stuff like that. Some of you might pair it with a wireless headset. Some of you will run your quad speaker system at full volume. All of that can nip at your battery life, like brightness, a lot, but even the sound system can take a half an hour or an hour of your battery life. And because of that versatility, Apple wants to give you a rough overview. I think they should also give that kind of number for the Mac, right? Instead, they try to focus on like web browsing and video watching, but that's mostly because these are industry standards for laptops in terms of tests. For tablets, there have never really been that many standards before the iPad, and since Apple did set the 10-hour standard, they basically never moved away from it. But ask yourself that. If the M2 iPad Pro, right, the 11-inch version, it went from an LCD 120 hertz screen to a tandem OLED screen. Think about it. If they are running, plus it went from an N5P to an N3E based processor. It got newer Wi-Fi and 5G modems. Think about now with the M5 generation, now they have a much more efficient N1 modem that's in-house designed by Apple. Ask yourself realistically, do you really think that these devices in the real world have the exact same 10 hours of battery life? No, of course not. And in fact, if you were just to isolate some stuff, for example, the tandem OLED screen obviously can get perfectly dark, in parts of the screen that are supposed to be black, right? And it turns off. It doesn't consume power for those portions of the screen during that. Compare running a 16:9 aspect ratio video on an 11-inch iPad with a tandem OLED screen versus a previous 11-inch with a standard LCD, not even the mini LED panel that you found in the 13-inch version. And mini LED, by the way, is way less efficient than tandem OLED because of some other reasons. But obviously, the iPad has always had some versions that had significantly more real-world battery life than 10 hours. Some others had less. Capacity, screen size differences, screen quality differences, processor differences, right? There's a lot, even like thermal differences. We usually associate better thermals in a device with a better product. And that's true, but think about it. If your device can sustain higher power draw from the chip, right, which means it manages its thermals better, a device with the same chip and battery capacity will actually consume less power if it throttles, and therefore will run longer. So yeah, there's so many variables, and Apple just chooses to give a much more simplistic 10-hour take. Part of that also comes down to because Apple always wants to make the iPad thinner and lighter. They're always willing to cut battery capacity a little bit from gen to gen sometimes. So they don't want to promise you 12, 14, 15 hours on one generation only to then kind of have to go back to 10 hours on the next. If they choose to advertise both of them as 10 hours, it doesn't feel like a downgrade, even if realistically they might cut off like sometimes half an hour or an hour from your max battery life. But that's because it was always above 10 hours.
Allowed to gain more ports. You know, the MacBook Neo has 2 USB-C ports and a headphone jack. Far more versatile for education and everyday customers who may not have AirPods, and yet they still don't.
The MacBook Neo doesn't have Thunderbolt. Meanwhile, the iPad Pro does, which, again, take it or leave it. The iPad also, by the way, allows you to charge through the back. Not the greatest solution, but obviously with the Magic Keyboard, it kind of has 2 ports similar to how the MacBook Neo has 2 USB-C ports, because it has one that's going to be really high speed, and that's the one on the iPad itself, and that's one that's going to be mostly for charging, or exclusively for charging. That's the one in your Magic Keyboard. So, and again, you can advertise the headphone jack as much as you want. I personally think, like, look, I'm using my headphone jack right now on my Mac, even though I could be actually sticking it right into my Shure microphone, and the functionality would be exactly the same. But the thing I'm trying to say is the MacBook Neo is the wrong Mac to advertise here. At least start with like the MacBook Air, which also has Thunderbolt, which has a MagSafe port, so at least you can always use the USB-C ports for data and display outputs because you have a separate charging port. That is an advantage over the iPad. And I do agree that the iPad should have 2 USB-C ports. I just don't like, even if you just were to use a pair of USB-C earpods, that already would be quite a value add, right? But that's not really, it's not like, oh, it's not allowed to do that. Obviously, through some workarounds, Apple themselves ship you like iPads with a second port. You just have to put the iPad in the Magic Keyboard. But it's, again, it's mostly because people aren't really asking for it. If people were really clamoring all over the internet that they want more ports on their iPads, Apple would give it, especially on the Pros, where they already have Thunderbolt. They could just put 2 ports side by side. Granted, again, as I said, they would have to make the iPad more structurally rigid for that. Split one Thunderbolt connection between them, which means if you have one Thunderbolt accessory plugged in, it would be full speed. If you have 2 accessories plugged in, they would share the bandwidth, which right now would be Thunderbolt 4, so 40 gigabits per second in each direction.
Don't even want to budge on the iPad getting a second USB-C port, and that's when it hit me, okay? If it's not split-screen multitasking, that's the iPad's main advantage, and if
I mean, it's an advantage over the iPhone, right? If you just want a device for some light multi-touch and all your needs are basically met with the iPad, then yeah, like, and again, especially if you, now that we have like 13 inches was previously like an iPad Pro exclusive thing. Now you can get it on the iPad Air for $800.
Next year, it's not even a large multi-touch display anymore because the MacBooks are going to start gaining that. What is the big iPad selling point? What is the advantage of the tablet over the increasingly large?
And again, you're saying the Mac is going to get it. Which Mac is going to get it? The $1,800 M6 MacBook Pro, potentially maybe only the M6 Pro and M6 Max MacBook Pros. This is such a different price league from even the iPad Pro, and obviously if you compare it to like an iPad Air or a base iPad, it's completely a non sequitur as a comparison. And if you also want to compare like portability, where it can actually use that multi-touch screen and use potentially the device as more like a little bit like a Kindle reader, well, now you have to compare it to something like the iPad Mini, and that's certainly not going to replace, not going to be replaced by a 14 or 16-inch MacBook Pro.
iPhones and the increasingly affordable and versatile Macs, well, it all comes back to the Apple Pencil. Every year, they come up with another software feature that is unique to the Pencil that, of course, you cannot replicate on the MacBooks or the iPhones, and probably due to durability concerns, I don't think the folding iPhone is going to get stylus.
Well, we do have some stylus support on some foldables. It's not fully universal, and it is a little bit questionable, but Apple is supposedly going with like a dual layer of ultra thin glass, an extra hard one, so we'll have to see.
Either, and it's a tricky debate to have it on the Mac as well because it's going to be a touch interface on top of a keyboard and mouse one, and adding another layer to register Apple Pencil taps, plus the display being more shaky as you're drawing on it and writing on it. Yeah, I don't think necessarily Apple Pencil support is coming to the Mac anytime soon, even if it is getting a touchscreen, but that's still unique.
I still don't see why touch support is coming to the Mac at all. I just don't think it's necessary.
iPad, it's a canvas. It's a note.
I cannot believe, by the way, that I've been reacting to this video for almost an hour.
It's an art device. In a world where AI is killing off a lot of the art field, the iPad still stays consistent as that digital canvas for artists.
Yeah, so many, what is that drawing iPad app called Procreate? So many people I know just bought iPads for Procreate. Now, yeah, they're gonna watch YouTube on it and stuff, and they do have laptops and some have desktop PCs. So it's not like, and that's why they're so relaxed about buying an iPad. They're like, oh, if the iPad cannot do one or two things, well, who cares, right? I'll still have that other product. And that might not be the greatest argument, especially in an economy where people can afford less and less. Seemingly, I do get that. But if the iPad is actually enough for you, especially without all the more expensive accessories, then it is the better choice because of all that versatility that you mentioned. You mentioned all versatility for the MacBook Neo, but that's versatility that many people don't need, even most of the time. Sure, during my streams, I have like an Ethernet adapter going through one USB-C port. I have my headphones. Again, I could connect them here. I have my microphone, obviously. I have my MagSafe charger, and I have a USB-C cable charging my iPhone. And also transmitting data, ideally, though wireless transfer is more than fast enough here. So I could, in theory, be just charging my iPhone through another source. But obviously, it's convenient because my Mac gets 100 watts through the MagSafe charger, and that's plenty for all the accessories and itself while streaming, even if I'm sometimes gaming during the streams. So obviously, that's something I can utilize. But guess what? With this kind of setup, even the MacBook Air would be a little bit iffy for me. The MacBook Neo, especially with its limited thermals and everything, now that would be a problem just because of the nature of the Neo, right? So, well, sure, the iPad will not allow me to do those things in software to begin with, but that's partially because Apple doesn't want you to be confronted with a lot of situations that the iPad isn't that good for. Partially because of thermals, somewhat small battery, at least for like the iPad Pros, I would argue, given the full power draw that an M5 could draw. So yeah, it's all like 6, 7, but it's all like, it's very much depends on what you need, what you want, and I feel like Drew just wanted the iPad to somehow become as powerful as a 16-inch MacBook Pro. I don't think that was ever really in the cards, even for the 18-inch iPad. I would be surprised if that happens, like that folded out iPad that's supposedly in development. We'll have to see.
And note-taking in schools, and the more you realize that the Apple Pencil is the actual product and that the iPad is the accessory, the more you start to understand the iPad. It's not meant to be a Mac replacement, though for some basic tasks it definitely can be.
So I don't think I need to comment very much on why this is silly, right? I've already outlined so many things that the iPad does well that don't require an Apple Pencil, right? And yes, even basic content consumption stuff like YouTube video, music playback, reading. I've been doing a lot more reading recently, and guess what? Not only is the iPad much more compact than my 14-inch Mac, but it actually offers the book form factor that I want, which is like this, right? And so yeah, I feel like so much is being ignored here just to make this point about the Apple Pencil. But hey, let me know what you think about all of this. Am I actually justified in wasting 45 to 50 minutes of this stream on a reaction video to a video that's less than 6 minutes long?
To take away from the iPhone experience, but as the iPhone gains more and more functionality and more form factors
And again, we're talking about also different kinds of iPhones and iPads. We are now talking about the $2,000 plus iPhone Fold that might get the multitasking of that's roughly equivalent to an iPad mini, right? So you're paying almost double of what you're paying for an iPhone Pro. For an or potentially just simply double, right? And not even getting all the goodies like a periscope camera and stuff like that. Potentially not getting the Apple Pencil support from the iPad. And then on the Mac side, because touchscreen is currently only rumored for like the M6 MacBook Pro, that's at least a starting point of $1,800. Then potentially more like 2,200 if my prediction stands true that only the M6 Pro and M6 Max iPads are actually going to get tandem OLED for the first generation. I just don't see like which iPads are you comparing to which devices, because at no point have you presented something that actually displaces that like $400 iPad or even that $600 iPad Air. Especially, by the way, Apple, get out of your ass and up from your ass. Both metaphors are correct here, and stop giving the iPad Air 128 gigabytes of base storage. Give it 256 gigabytes. We know it supports it. We know the M4 can even give you full speed on a 256 gigabyte configuration. So yeah, just chill, Apple. Strive 57X. I'm honestly torn on the iPad. It's great for kids and old people, but I hardly use mine. But I believe it spends so much time on my Mac. Yeah, but that's the point, right? If the Mac is better for you, that's a personal thing for you, and Apple should absolutely try to find some way to give the iPad more if they feel like they want the iPad to be less cannibalized by the Mac. Don't forget, people were plenty angry about the iPad cannibalizing Mac sales for a while, right? When the Mac was experiencing all those issues with the butterfly keyboard and stuff like that. But that's not an identity crisis for the iPad. It's just your personal buying decision, right? And depending on where you are in your life, you will use your iPad more than your Mac, or maybe as a student, and and you're saying old people, right? But depending on what work you do, let's say all your tech needs are met at work. Like for me, that's true. Like, sure, I can do my work from my Mac or even my iPad for the most part, but I do have a Windows PC where all that stuff is set up. It synchronizes with a larger database and everything. It automatically has my email account and everything set up, my work email, which I don't really like being cluttered up on my personal devices. So by the time I got home, sure, I know I need my Mac for the streams and everything. It's a cool product, and I do more on it. I game on it, and I play with stuff that's not as much available on the iPad, like certain emulators, even though that has gotten a lot better. So yes, absolutely. But when it comes to just things I need, not things I want or things I like, the iPad, by the time I get home, and in fact, at work, whenever I take a tech product with me, again, because I have that Windows PC there, it's usually my iPad. Like a few times I used my Mac to like work with like larger data sets in locally AI. But that's because it has 32 gigs of RAM. It's actually not a limitation of the iPad itself. It's just that there is no iPad with more than 16 gigs of RAM. And in fact, my own iPad only has 8 gigs. And I do not ever want to give my data, any kind of my data to the cloud, right? So that's the point. But I fully understand it. It's just what you described, Strive, was so perfect in a way because it's so simple. It's like, oh, my iPad, I'm using it less, but that's because I'm actually using my Mac more. So at no point are you hurting Apple, right? Because now it will just influence your further buying decisions, right? Which product are you much more likely to upgrade sooner or later? Which product are you much more likely to buy as an expensive Pro product and whatever, right? But think also about what you mentioned about, oh, it's great for kids and old people. Now, I disagree. I think it's also great for people in between. But think about it. At what point are you ever truly disconnected in your life from kids and old people, right? At some point, you are a kid. You are much more likely to be handed an iPad than a Mac. Now, it might change a little bit with the MacBook Neo, but still, for a lot of use cases, an iPad is still better. Then you grow up, you are not going to be immediately replace your iPad. So even as you grow into your teenhood, maybe you're just so familiar with everything, you might even keep using an old product or even buy a new iPad for your studies and whatever. But then you're like, okay, my iPad is hitting certain limits. Maybe I could force it to work, but now I'm going with my Mac or even a desktop PC, or a Linux setup for all I care, right? Because I need it apparently. And that's fine, obviously. The iPad can still stay with you, and whenever you lie down on the couch, maybe you buy like a 16-inch MacBook Pro. Maybe your iPad is a better device to doodle around, doom scroll a little bit, other than on your phone, right? But then that's like maybe 10 years of your life at most, and then it's time. Well, once you have kids, you will also consider it. Am I much more likely to get an iPad for my kids and for something that's just going to be handed around the living room between you, your wife, your partner, whatever, right? Your kids. And then over time, you become old as well. And throughout all that time, you might help your grandparents set up their own iPads. Or your parents become more elderly and you set up iPads for them as well. So, yeah, I'm not saying this is going to apply to absolutely everyone. But as somebody who has a family that relies primarily on me for tech stuff, like, yeah, I myself am I'm helping with tech stuff for my nieces and my nephew, for my mom partially, but more often for my grandma. And yeah, so stuff changes in life. It doesn't mean the iPad has an identity crisis. It means your own identity, your own experience in life evolves and changes. Strife, of course, like Rene Ritchie used to say, oh, I love it when people quote Rene. Still my favorite Apple YouTuber of all time. Such a shame he left. Tech YouTubers act like all people act like all products are meant for them as the primary consumer. And mind you, it really depends on you as a tech YouTuber, because I am very techy. In a way, I am a tech YouTuber, right? Like, I have like 350 videos on this channel, roughly at this point. So it would be, even though I do this as a hobby, it's hard to not call me a tech YouTuber at this point, right? So ask yourself that. If I can still extrapolate that part of my life where I obviously still use my iPad for reading basic mail and document stuff, and a lot of Photomator right now, or Pixelmator Pro. Pixelmator Pro. I use that. I like it better on the iPad than on the Mac. And yes, a reason for that, for example, is the Apple Pencil, but also the touchscreen in general. Even if I were doing like a magnetic selection with a finger, it still feels better often than with a mouse. And if I can understand that without asking myself, oh my God, the Mac can technically do everything my iPad does, minus the Apple Pencil, why do I even have the iPad? Well, at some point, it's also just convenient to have multiple pieces of tech, right? Technically, I can, one of those examples, and once again, I always point to it, but it's never close enough for me to pick up. My PS Portal, right? I have a big 13-inch iPad that can easily connect to the PlayStation Remote Cloud, right? To my PlayStation. It cannot connect to the actual cloud, but I always basically use Remote Play. I almost never use the actual cloud, right? And technically, if I use my iPad and a DualSense controller, and I have two, so I can always leave one with my iPad and one with my PlayStation, right? I can just connect and play, and in fact, the screen is more beautiful than on the PS Portal. It's larger. I can even do it with multitasking. But guess what? It's just much more convenient to always have the controller attached, to have a device that basically just does one thing in software. And yeah, and that's why I bought the PS Portal and never actually regretted it. So whenever people are always like, well, this product is so much more versatile, I always have to remind people sometimes more versatility comes with more complexity, more cost, a form factor that might be what is the saying? Jack of all trades, master of none, right? That is a very good for description, for example, for the MacBook Neo in a way. So yeah, it is complicated, as we usually say, but Strife, you said it really well by quoting Renee here.
This year, I think the iPad's true identity is being more exposed as an accessory to the Apple.
Yeah, it was. Mind you, the iPad existed for 5 years between the original iPad and the 2015 iPad Pro. That includes the first iPad, the iPad 2, the new iPad or third generation iPad with a Retina display, the A6X fourth generation iPad that launched simultaneously with the iPad Mini. Wait, no, the iPad Mini launched. Wait, did the iPad Mini launch? No, it launched earlier, right? Oh, now I'm confusing myself. No, I think the iPad Mini coexisted with like the iPad 2 for a while as the cheaper alternative. I think it launched parallel to the fourth gen iPad, but maybe I'm mistaken. It didn't launch next to the new iPad, as far as I know. Let me know if I'm wrong, because I kind of am afraid to look it up. I don't want to seem silly. So where were I? So in that time, fourth gen iPad, then original iPad Air with A7 chip, then iPad Air 2 alongside all of that, then next generation iPad Mini and shit like that. And only then did Apple introduce the 2015 iPad Pro with an A9X chip. So just something for you to keep in mind. Shame that Apple kind of ruined multitasking with iPadOS 26. The only thing I dislike, I have always had a problem with some, like I just don't use the multitasking features that I don't need. Like on the Mac, for example, I'm very adamant about I like Stage Manager, but I like Stage Manager because I think it works really well with keyboard and mouse, because I just hover and open whatever I need. It's a great preview for your multitasking windows in a way. On the iPad, I never used Stage Manager, and ever since, what was it, 26.3 or 0.4, since they allowed you again to do the perfect UI system for multitasking, in my opinion, and it's still a shame to me that the Mac doesn't have it, which is to drag something from the dock and pin it to the side. Like I cannot complain, but sometimes I do get accidental touches where I end up resizing an iPad window even though I didn't mean to. So I wouldn't say, like I personally wouldn't say they ruined it, but I would also argue they didn't improve it as much as they made it out to be. And that's partially because I was happy with the iPad multitasking before it. The one thing that I will not accept, well, I will accept it, of course, if it's your opinion, but I will argue against it, is people really saying, oh, I miss slide over a lot. And I'm like, between Stage Manager, the multitasking overview, the ability to do side by side, and of course the ability to do just multiple windows at the screen at once, I feel like slide over just was too much. And they kind of still have it in a way, but in a subtler way and less powerful way. And I wouldn't even be surprised if they make it return, but it's not something I ever used that much. Well, I used it a lot on my original iPad Air, because the iPad Air 2 got proper two-screen multitasking because it had 2 gigs of RAM, but the original iPad Air with only 1 gig of RAM didn't allow you to do proper side-by-side multitasking. It only allowed you to do slide over. So I was forced to use slide over for multitasking in a way.
Pencil, not necessarily its own product. But how do you guys feel about the
Yeah,
iPad?
I feel that this is stupid, but I've already wasted an hour in response saying how the iPad has so much more capabilities than the Apple Pencil, making price and feature arguments against products like the iPhone Fold and the upcoming Tandem OLED MacBook. So I think I'm done with this. I spent way more time on it, but I still feel like I could say twice as much on this. So, but I think this is something that over time, it's going to keep haunting us because I love the iPad. Some of my first successes on the channel came actually from covering primarily iPad-focused content. Yeah. But thank you, Drew. I haven't done like a lot of hot takes responses for a while. I wouldn't say that my response here is the hot take. I would argue his is. Yeah. But with that being out of the way, let us actually transition to something that's less Apple, but it is also in the title, which is my rant on the 2026 Microsoft Surface devices. And because we talked about iPads, we can start with something like the Surface Pro. Let's just look at Windows Central, because I was absolutely floored. Like, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the prices, the relative lack of features, the incongruent, inconsistent upgrades, with one device getting, for example, like a much higher pixel density screen. The other one doesn't. And I'm like, Jesus, what is happening here? And also this weird thing about like, oh, these are business devices. That's why they're more expensive. But I'm like, wait, but the configurations you're offering, they're not very business tailored at that price, which means if you are going to make them very expensive for businesses, just scratch out the stupid 256 gigabyte configuration and stuff like that. Like, Apple's pricing on storage and RAM isn't great, but wait until you see what Microsoft is doing here. Microsoft's unveiled Surface Laptop 8, that's this one, and Surface Pro 12, so these are called by the generations. I personally think kind of it's similar to how I feel about iPhones, where I think now that we are at iPhone 17, the numbers are starting to get a little bit ridiculous. And Surface Pro 12, even though it's a smaller number than iPhone 17, it kind of feels in that ballpark. Let me know if you think I'm crazy to believe that. Yeah, and like I just feel like name your devices after the chips or the year that you launched them in. Like this Surface Laptop 8, Surface Pro 12, it's just gonna cause more confusion, especially by the time, because, for example, if I were to look for the Surface Laptop 8, right, I'm also often getting content for the Surface Pro 8, because online there's actually very little Surface Laptop 8 content, but YouTube, in their wish to still give you content to consume, do bring up Surface Pro 8 stuff, which wouldn't really happen if those devices were just called Surface Pro, Surface Laptop. And by the way, I also don't like that this is called Surface Pro and this is called Surface Laptop. Call this the Surface Tab at this point or something like that. But nevertheless, they're getting Intel Core Ultra Series 3 chips. That's what we talked about a lot. They have good graphics. They have decent efficiency, at least by x86 standards. They're definitely ahead of AMD in that front. Not great single-core performance, not groundbreaking multi-core performance. In fact, I would argue single-core performance is actually, like, versus Qualcomm, it's mediocre. Versus Apple, it's outright bad. But they're getting these new chips, display upgrades, and again, some of this are inconsistent, and new haptics. So this is, of course, to do with Microsoft introducing some haptic effects in Windows 11, and that's why they needed new trackpads for that, and like a new buzzing system inside. There will be Snapdragon X2 variants over the summer. So again, stupid business versus consumer launch. I have no idea why they even do this. Who the fuck buys these devices for business? And who will buy them, especially now with those prices? I really hope that they have like a mass business purchase discount with like extended warranty and shit like that. I will not be focusing on stuff like maybe you get more software features or more warranty here versus non-business devices, because I just think if you're going to offer these kinds of products, especially if you really have no traction, like you keep pushing out these devices without ever gaining that much market share, you cannot afford to be priced at the same value as a Mac. You certainly cannot afford to be priced at a much worse value than a Mac. So they're regurgitating all that stuff. Well, the flagship now starts at almost $2,000, and we're going to get to some of the configurations here. The flagship Surface Laptop 13.8 and 15-inch are the stars of the show, featuring the most notable upgrades with new display options. Certain new Surface Laptop configurations now include a hardware privacy screen filter that can be enabled on device, similar to the Galaxy S26 Ultra. This, I guess, is what makes it more business, but then again, this is also just an option. So it's not like you're even at the base configurations you're getting it, and the base configurations are already business priced. The 15-inch now gets a higher pixel density, upgraded from 201 to 262 ppi, which actually makes it higher ppi now, which is, I believe, 254 on the Mac. On the iPad it's 264. Or very close to that. And the MacBook Air and the MacBook Neo, they have 220. So this was a bit more competitive with those devices. Now it's very competitive with the MacBook Pro. But mind you, it needs to be given the price. And this also means that the 13.8-inch does not actually get that improvement. Despite its really high starting price point, it actually has a lower pixel density than a MacBook Air, even though it's closer priced to a MacBook Pro. The displays are still LCD, and there is no mini LED here to speak of. So in terms of contrast and high dynamic range, they will also not keep up with the mini LEDs on the MacBook Pro. OLED options are rumored to be coming later this year. They do come out later, but then again, it's a little bit like a question that I have, but it's much more reasonable there, is with the Switch 2, right? The Switch 2 is a successor to the Switch, but the Switch got the Switch OLED in the meantime. I'm like, why do I have to wait another few years to get the option for something that has already existed? Especially if you're charging me more. Yeah, and they're getting a new touchpad. These devices now ship with an upgraded trackpad that features support for Windows 11's new haptic signals feature, which will provide subtle feedback when interacting with certain elements of Windows 11 UI, such as snapping app windows and aligning objects. Apparently, it's being somewhat positively received right now. Was this written by Zach Bowden? Yeah, so he's the main guy here, but he's also very positive on Windows, like way more positive, like on Microsoft, way more positive than I am on Apple. So, but that's nice. One thing that I really cannot say anything bad about the Surface laptops is I think their keyboards are great, and I think their trackpads are the best on Windows. The Surface Laptop 13-inch, which is supposed to be Microsoft's mid-range Surface Laptop offering, is shipping with Intel chips and an anti-reflective display for the first time. This device is otherwise exactly the same as the last-gen models, but starts now at a much higher price of $1499. And mind you, they want to release a 13-inch version with 8 gigs of RAM. That's the same configuration as on the MacBook Neo, a device that runs an operating system that's far less RAM hungry. And they want to price this, yes, ladies and gentlemen, at $12.99. And despite all of Microsoft's efforts to brand every shit they can get their fingers on as Copilot Plus PCs, this $1,300 device in 2026, because it will only have 8 gigs of RAM, I also assume it will probably have an even more GIMP processor, starts at $1,300, which is basically, well, it's over double the price of the MacBook Neo. And I'm not even considering that it's going to have actually much more storage, because if you look at the storage configurations here, you will actually start to think for the first time in your life that Apple might be generous here, which is not really something that you should ever feel about Apple's storage and RAM pricing, right? So these are the devices. Let's talk about them. There's a Surface Laptop for Business 8 review. Even Windows Central gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and they like to give more, believe me. So let's start with the Surface Pro, because we were talking a lot about tablets here, right? What do you get? In fact, I can even open apple.com. We can start comparing it to the iPad. Well, let's compare it just to the iPad Pro. Let's compare it to the 13-inch, right? Okay. So, what is happening with the website? Oh. Oh, it for some reason loaded up the just the image file for it. That's weird. Build your device. Okay. So, Intel Core Ultra processor with an LCD screen for $1,949. Okay, so we have an LCD screen here versus a tandem OLED screen, mind you, at $1,300. If you're getting these devices just for content consumption, mind you, you're now fucked, basically, right? Wi-Fi, that's Wi-Fi. Well, how much does it cost to get 5G? Well, 5G will actually cost you now $300. How much does 5G cost us here? Well, will cost you $300. Here, it will cost you $200. And this is using Apple's very efficient C1X modem. Maybe it's not the absolute best in the industry, but it has great battery life, great thermals in relation to many other options. So lower base price. If you want to get to 5G, you're already paying less, mind you, and with a much better screen. Angelica joining the stream. Thank you so much. As just big thank you to everyone who's joining. Right. Okay, we are starting with 256 gigabytes, mind you, of RAM. Okay, yeah, that would have actually been great at this price point. I'm not going to deny it. But this is the same base starting price point as the iPad. Now, this one has a little bit more RAM. It starts with 16 gigabytes versus the iPad starting at 12. While on the iPad, you do have to pay more, obviously, to get to 16 gigabytes. But mind you, these are like, why is there a configuration with 32 gigs of storage of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, right? What kind of unbalanced crap? And you're paying $450. This is even more than Apple charges, because Apple charges $200 per 8 gigs of RAM upgraded, right? So in here, you're paying at $50 more than that, which, I mean, Apple's prices were already ridiculous, but hey, mind you, the M5 iPad Pro is a better chip than what's in here, plus a higher efficiency. But yeah, I guess whatever, no thanks. And yeah, so does that seem reasonable to you? Mind you, again, tandem OLED screen here. Like, not just OLED, but highest brightness OLED, highest longevity OLED. Like, Are you kidding me? Versus this being a standard LCD screen, not even being a mini LED screen. It's absolutely banana. Like, you get like some niceties, like 2 USB-C ports and that Surface connector. So maybe there's some justification for this device to be similarly priced to the iPad. It certainly has zero justification to cost 50% more than the iPad, with pretty equivalent specs, mind you, in just when it comes to RAM and storage. When it comes to screen, when it comes to like when you want to compare single core performance, for example, it's a completely different league. And if you want to make the argument, okay, it has that kickstand, right? It can stand up on its own. It doesn't need accessories. This Taurus thing was like $50. So, right, and it actually protects my iPad, and it has a place for a pencil holder, right? So my pencil is protected too, and I even get 2 kickstands. So this is more for a drawing angle, right? And if this ever breaks or whatever, I get to replace it. If my kickstand on my Surface breaks, that's a much more different discussion. Plus, if I take this out, it's even lighter, nicer to hold. Again, that's not an excuse for it not to have a kickstand, but it is important context. Right? So you thought that was bad, right? To make like that Family Guy joke of like, you think that's bad, insert random sketch. Let's actually look at the Surface laptop for business here. Starting at $1949. This is, ladies and gentlemen, this is for the 13.8-inch version. So let's actually, always making sure that my stream is working in parallel. Guys, let me know. What do you think of the pricing here? Look, the MacBook Air, it will lack promotion here, right? I'll totally admit it. Let's you know what? Let's be generous here. Let's actually start. Oh, I actually forget. It actually starts only at $1,700. Always think it starts at $1,800 now. 14 inches, $1,699, right? So that's a larger screen, mind you, than the 13.8-inch device. We aren't even considering the fact that they are like the nano texture screen, for example, is a pretty unique advantage here. So M5. I'll even consider some plus points, like the fact that the Surface laptop has like a touchscreen, right? So this base processor has terrible graphics. The graphics are essentially 3 times worse than on here. When you don't get an X processor in this Series 3, mind you, with Ultra 5 here, you're also getting some cuts in CPU performance, and this is on a chip that already lags significantly behind on the CPU side versus the M5, getting close to it in multitasking, but getting absolutely demolished by it in single core performance, right? So let's look at the configuration. Let's say you actually want 512 gigabytes here, because mind you, this one starts with 500. This one starts at 1 terabyte now. Really, at $1,700. Wait, do I not get a 1 terabyte option even here? Right, even here, right, it's 32 gigs of there's no 24 gigs of RAM like here, right? But like the special screen, even that one here is $200, while on the iPad the nano texture screen is $150. So even Apple is just like it feels like they just took Apple's prices and made them universally worse. But look at the 15-inch, because that one will have at least a somewhat competitive pixel density. Mind you, neither of these devices actually have a high contrast ratio screen. They're standard LCD screens. They're not OLED. They're not mini LED. They're not tuned for especially high brightness. If you actually look here, and you look at the display portion of the review, Um, do they not? They say it's 500 nits. But yeah, meanwhile, the Mac gives you 1,000 nits, right? So let's see what configurations you get here. Wait, there's no 1 terabyte config? Jesus, this is just horrible. Wait, at that point, I can just be evil here and I can just configure a freaking M5 Pro. Let's use the bint version. Let's go from 24 gigs of RAM to 48. We have double the storage. Hell, let me update to 2 terabytes, right? For $29.99, I get a system here with 50% more memory, 4 times more storage. Mind you, now with the M5 Pro, I'm also getting PCIe 5 enabled storage, and this memory has a ton more memory bandwidth because it's on a larger memory bus. I have a chip that's absolutely transformative in CPU and GPU performance. And mind you, I have not even clicked on the highest version yet. And I'm paying $100. I'm paying $300 more, right? Obviously, if we now look at similar storage configurations, for example, right? Now I'm paying less for double the storage, 50% more memory, and realistically, like, are you really gonna pay these kinds of upgrades here? At least this one, right? You're paying $100 to go from 256 to 512 gigabytes. Why even offer then that 512 gigabyte model? And again, 16 gigabytes, this is absolutely getting mocked by this with the base M5 Pro without me even updating anything. Now I can go to 24 gigs of RAM. I can pay $21.99. I get better speakers. I get a mini LED screen. Like, I get so much. I get Thunderbolt 5. This is absolutely incomparable now. And then, again, if I really want to, I just save the money, go to 16 gigs of RAM and the base M5 chip. And this, like, I know it's for business, and I understand that their regular products are going to be priced better. But are they really going to be priced that much better? Because if you look at it, this is a non-business product, right? Wait, are there non-business? Wait, why is everything business here? This is Microsoft. Do they not have non-business stuff? Wait, what even is business about this product, right? It's a $1,500 13-inch device with 16 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, so it's half the storage of a MacBook Air. What are you paying for here? Let's even say this is the base configuration of the MacBook Air. Would you really consider it? That's the configuration. And at this price point, it has a way better chip too, and way better battery life because of the efficiency of that chip. It's absolutely insane in terms of difference. Wait, I'm just going crazy. Is this just like, this is business, okay? So let's click on non-business shit because I know they're better priced. So, but these are last gen, and I believe these are powered by the Snapdragon X chips. And you can already see that they have some severe cutbacks to even get, like, this is a 60 hertz screen. This is one of the few shortcomings of the MacBook Air, right? But this one at $1149, mind you, right, has half the storage, like an infinitely worse chip, with an operating system that's not even optimized for this last gen chip. And this is like an 8-core. This is really, really bad. 256 gigabytes. This is now half the storage that the MacBook Air gets at the lower price point. It's absolutely crazy. And if we just look at the 13.8-inch non uh, uh, like yeah, X Plus for $1,500? Nah, sorry, man. Uh, These are stupid configurations, absolutely stupid. And you can already see like save up to $750 and everything. So Microsoft knows that they kind of have to get rid of them as much as possible. And even here, 16 gigs of, again, 16 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage. This costs $100 less than a Mac with 16 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage and the mini LED screen and a better chip and Thunderbolt 5. No, and not the base version, right? Thunderbolt 4, whatever. But you can get a discounted M4 Pro MacBook Pro. It's such a better deal. It's absolutely stupid. And yeah, you can see, yeah, in order to make this one, let's say 1 terabyte makes sense, 32 gigs of RAM makes sense, right? Now, this configuration that's like discounted by like 30%, that one suddenly starts to look maybe okay. If this were, by the way, an X2 Elite chip, the original X Elite, that one barely competes with the M4, much less the M5. So yikesy, yikesy. This is absolutely horrible, but I just wanted to show it because if the iPad has an identity crisis, I don't know what the Surface lineup has. I guess it's more suicidal ideation at this point. And I guess this video will now get demonetized for shocking content. It just applies to the technology. I was not talking about people killing themselves in a video game. I was talking about technology being depressed. So stupid. Guys, we've now made it through a lot of bullshit. So Drew's hot takes, Microsoft's absolutely atrocious pricing, whether we are looking at the business or the non-business configuration. Let's get into some Apple stuff. First is something that I actually care about because I'm an Apple Watch Ultra 2 owner, and my mom actually wants my Apple Watch because her Series 4 is getting long in the tooth and she just refuses to buy an Apple Watch for herself. I even made like arguments to self, buy yourself an SE if you don't care about tech, or just don't buy something as big as the Ultra. And she tried it on, she was like, no, I like it, and she just likes using my tech. She just feels the bigger emotional connection to it. Well, now I would have an excuse, because if this actually is true, I would now suddenly be excited. Mind you, the Apple Watch Ultra 3 already introduced quite some nice things over the Ultra 4, over the Ultra 2, like 5G capabilities, satellite connectivity, the much better always-on display functionality with a much more also efficient screen. So in some scenarios, you're also getting better battery life. The Apple Watch Ultra 4 is also much more is also very likely to finally introduce a chip that's a noticeable step forward. Going to use some form of 3 nanometer node, while current Apple Watches are more on 5/4 nanometer. So a lot of improvements coming. Well, now, according to Digitimes, which, to bring up Rene Ritchie, who Strive brought up before, as randomly accurate he used to describe them. Well, according to them, Apple Watch Ultra 4 could feature a complete redesign and blood pressure monitoring, according to Digitimes. Apple will apparently add a new high blood pressure notification feature to the watch that uses an optical heart rate sensor on the back of the device to analyze how blood vessels responds to each heartbeat. So this is already based on software that Apple is working on with the hypertension notifications feature. This could point to Apple having hardware that's more precise and more tuned for that feature. It does not actually, the only thing that could actually stand out is that this hypertension notification feature requires 30-day period analysis, right? So it first has to get basically an understanding of how do your blood vessels look, right? Throughout the day, how do they change? And then it can ascertain over time what's a scenario of high blood pressure for you, what's a scenario of regular blood pressure for you, and then use different reference points that are obviously programmed in to ascertain what's your blood pressure and how does it change. If it has hardware specifically built for that, maybe it could shorten these 30-day periods. Maybe it could even work right away in a way. But one thing that I do not think is actually going to happen is I do not think Apple is just going to offer you, oh, you put your Apple Watch on it for the first time and right away it reads out your exact blood pressure. I think it's going to much more focus on relative blood pressure and blood pressure changes. So maybe this has better hardware for it. Yeah, according to DigiTimes, this new feature already exists, but the update represents a more refined or clinically validated implementation of already underlying hardware. Who knows? The more interesting part here is that it's getting a redesign, something that DigiTimes has even predicted already last year, saying that at least one Apple Watch model would get a significant redesign, with supply chain sources pointing to exterior design changes, including 8 sensors arranged in a ring pattern on the back. So it could be a design change that might not actually be as apparent, and the overall shape that's user-facing is still similar, but who knows? Today's update describes the changes more forcefully, calling it a full redesign alongside a significant upgrade to sensing functions. So I assume that these sensing functions would also feed back into that hypertension stuff. But who knows? According to market observers cited by the report, the redesign could boost Apple Watch shipments by 20 to 30%. Yeah, it has been a while since a redesign, and I could actually see people going out to specifically buy an Apple Watch that finally has a new design. And if you combine it with a brand new chip, which is something that more nerds care about, but nerds are a not insignificant portion of any Apple consumer base. So even they can obviously, and they can also create a better just a better conception of it, right? Reviews will be like, oh, this Apple Watch is a bit more future-proof because it has a much newer, faster processor or something like that. So even if people might not be immediately interested in a new chip themselves, they would see reviews saying, oh, if you were waiting to buy an Apple Watch, the next generation is likely going to be a very small upgrade, so buy this one. Some other people might buy up a lot of older Apple Watches that will flood the market. So there will be a very healthy upgrade cycle. Some people call that sometimes a super cycle. Yeah, but overall, I'm now interested in Apple Watch Ultra 4, which I wasn't expecting to be, but yeah, if it is actually a significant redesign, plus obviously space black or titanium black wasn't available on my Apple Watch Ultra 2 right away. It came out a year after, was still the Apple Watch Ultra 2, but just got a new color. And then a year after that, we got the Apple Watch Ultra 3. So I'm now finally interested because the combination of a new color and an actual new design and a screen that might actually finally make me use always on displays, because in all my years of using Apple Watches, I've never turned on always on displays, no matter whether my Apple Watch supported it or not. But with the higher efficiency and the updates being per second, yeah, this now becomes interesting to me, but we'll have to see. Ultimately. Now, I've teased it a lot, and this is primarily something that's because we have talked, of course, a lot about WWDC and so much new software stuff. This is kind of one big individual story because there's a lot of parts for it. Many of them also come from the same Bloomberg article, and some of it are basically like leaks and rumors that we've now had for a while. So Apple Intelligence is actually getting a much more significant update than I think many people expected. So obviously we all know that there will be a revamped AI chatbot version of Siri. And just recently, Mark Gurman even commented that it will have a separate app with options for auto-deleting Siri auto delete. I actually don't think I have an article open for that. Change to English. PC, Mac, and Gadget. I like 95 Mac and Mac rumors because I like their interfaces. So, obviously Siri is going to be the star of the show, right? But it seems like not only Siri, but also just Apple Intelligence in general is expanding through bigger and more important parts of the operating system and offering more and more features that actually, like, it's not going to be Sherlocking, but we're going to talk about some features that have existed in other stuff, but now because they're first party integrated, it's going to be actually a question how some form of third-party apps survive after this. Let's start again with the star of the show, Siri. According to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, Siri gets a dedicated app in iOS 27. I assume that also applies to iPadOS 27, macOS 27, and stuff like that. This app will give users options to keep conversations in memory for a limited time, obviously for privacy and security. Gurman says that Apple is keen to market its privacy credential as a key advantage in the way it is implementing AI across its software compared to rivals. Cognizant of the perception that it has fallen behind other companies, which is correct in that regard. Like we saw, like maybe the Google I/O event overall was boring, right? But you cannot argue that it had a lot of AI stuff and stuff that Apple simply doesn't have. Apple will lean into privacy as a core tenet of its approach. That's something that they have been doing since iOS 18, but I think having actually a lot of features and well-functioning features that are also private is gonna go better than, oh, we don't even have most AI features, but ours are very private, right? So it's a balance that you have to achieve. In the settings panel for the new Siri app, users will be able to choose to keep conversations for 30 days, 1 year, or forever, says Gurman based on his sources. A similar feature can already be found in the Messages app settings. Most leading AI chatbots today rely heavily on histories and memory systems. That is not really correct. When we are talking about the free versions, your personal history of queries and everything, this is true for something like OpenClaw, or when you are working with one of those super premium models where you're paying $200 a month. There is no actual memory for most responses that AI is going to utilize. Maybe inside a specific conversation it will remember the individual queries, but having a big memory about you, that's has nothing to do with your chat history. That has to do more with like data access to your specific device and whatever. So I don't think that Gurman knows that much about AI, but I've said that time and time again. I think he hates the fact that he cannot talk as much about AI as like some Google covering journalists. So he tries to make as many Apple stories about AI as he can. He has been obsessed with engineers either leaving or coming to Apple for their AI teams. So whatever, Mark Gurman. Apple will place tighter limits around how memory works, including restrictions on what information can persist and how long can it be retained. So this is also important because Apple, it has 3 Siri features that kind of we expected to come still before iOS 27. Who knows? Maybe they will make us wait until iOS 27. Maybe they will release as some part of iOS 26.6 or something like that. But Apple still has on-screen awareness, personal context, and in-app controls, right, through app intents for Siri. And in fact, we'll get to how some other leaked, rumored features here are kind of building on top of that. Gurman also mentions that users will be able to decide if the Siri app opens showing either a grid or prior conversations or a new chat screen. So there is some customization here. Makes sense. I hope it looks different than basically every other chatbot app, because I would be very disappointed if Apple chose that very simplistic but not really inspired approach. Sometimes simplistic is bad, but I would argue that some of these apps are a little bit too simplistic. Gemini will be the underlying model here, but again, Apple is customizing that, and the data is not flowing to Google. So Apple will be able to still control privacy and security. And with better Siri, you're also getting more and more AI stuff in general. iOS 27 will add a new custom wallpaper feature. That is very simple. This is also coming from Bloomberg, saying the system appears in the translucent menu that slides up from the bottom of the screen and displays original text alongside suggested revisions. This is basically, oh no, sorry. This is, wait, what? Jesus, this is three new features: grammar, shortcuts. Oh, finally, iOS 27 will allegedly include a feature that lets users generate custom wallpapers using AI. The feature will be built on the existing Image Playground app and appear as another option in the standard wallpaper picker interface. So this is something that I've talked about, where I want Apple to actually make AI part of the system, don't force you to get into other apps. And that to me would also suggest that Apple is much more confident about these apps. The way that Image Playground kind of exists on the side kind of makes it look like Apple, to be honest, rightfully doesn't have too much trust in it. But now you will be able to generate wallpapers, which there are already a ton of AI tools for that. There are a lot of third-party apps to do it. But of course, being integrated right into the system, that will be a huge thing and potentially kill a lot of third-party apps. The wallpaper picker includes a new option powered by the Image Playground app for creating custom lock and home screen background. So this is simple, but makes sense. Next is shortcuts. In the updated app, users are presented with a prompt asking, what do you want your shortcut to do, along with a text field to describe the request. The system then automatically builds and installs the shortcut on the device. This is perfect, and this is something that I've been asking for ever since Apple introduced Apple Intelligence. I have argued that shortcuts are a super powerful way to manage your device, but even with the Shortcuts app, which by all standards of the industry is very simplistic and very intuitive, people who are not die-hard techies will not be going out of the way to create shortcuts. This is why it's very good that you can share your shortcuts and basically alleviate someone else's work to have to do that. If somebody else has already made all the steps, why should somebody else have to go through that? But obviously, you also want shortcuts that might be tailored to specific contexts of yours and stuff like that. So you do want your ability to create very specific shortcuts on your device without much tech knowledge and without much hassling and learning in the app. And having that just through a simple text field, where through natural voice recognition, what's basically the new Siri, going to be able to do that for you, I think that's amazing. And I think this is going to make shortcuts much more widely used. And once people start creating their own shortcuts, because much more people will be incentivized to do so, a lot more people will also be able to discover very powerful shortcuts that are created by more pro users, because now shortcuts will be, well, they will be much better known. And it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats situation. The other feature here is something that Grammarly should be probably very worried about. First, the report says iOS 27 will include a more powerful grammar checker similar to Grammarly. The system appears in the translucent menu that slides up from the bottom of the screen and displays original text alongside suggested revisions. Users can accept individual suggestions, approve all changes, or ignore them altogether. There are also controls to pause grammar checking and navigate between flagged sections of text. This is amazing. I've already been positively surprised by writing tools and even Apple's basic summary feature, especially for the fact that most of it is working on device. the fact that you won't have to pay for a third-party tool like Grammarly, and the fact that this could be likely available for every Apple Intelligence supporting device at no extra cost, and hopefully will not even ask you to get any kind of newer hardware with more powerful AI processing. I think this is going to be amazing, and this is probably going to be very quickly going to become one of my most used AI features. Currently, Genmoji is my most used AI feature. Then it's regular chatbots. Genmoji is also rumored to be getting some updates. I don't need to open up an article for it. Basically, the idea is that Genmojis will be suggested to you, like, oh, you typed something in, and kind of how, well, if you type in banana, you do get a recommendation for a banana emoji. And now, depending on what you type, you could also get a suggestion to create a Genmoji. So that is already great. That will probably double and triple my usage of Genmojis. But especially this will like quintuple to sextuple my usage of Apple writing tools. So you see how iOS 27, which was rumored for a while to basically just be a refinement year, you can argue a lot about stuff like, so this is the same. This is also shortcuts. I've opened up some stories basically twice. But you can see that these AI features, right, they make sense because this is stuff you do on device. And maybe some of it goes into cloud, but I mean, it's going to be right in the UI, and it's just going to help you so much in crucial things. And this is why yesterday, for example, when Google was presenting like, oh, here's like some new stuff for Notebook LM, and I'm like, okay, but I kind of want a separate app for notes. If you're going to make them so powerful with AI, why not give us a Notes app? Apple has a Notes app. Microsoft has a Notes app. Samsung has actually a great Notes app. Right? And Apple seems to be doing these exact things. Not only are they thankfully giving Siri a separate, a dedicated app, but also all the other stuff is being integrated into all these system features, some of them which are built around separate apps, right? Obviously, you're going to use writing tools and the new grammar check much more in Apple Pages and Notes, whatever. And of course, because it's system-wide, you're going to use it in other, like Microsoft Word. You can, of course, but from day one, of course, it's very likely that Apple is just going to have these capabilities very much optimized for Pages, Keynote, Numbers, all that stuff. And that, to me, is very encouraging because that, like, sure, I use chatbots for general intelligence all the time, but or general knowledge. It's not AGI yet, right? No matter what Google keeps promising. But this is exactly how I want it to be. And if it required a delay for Apple to wise up and improve on some of their AI stances, then I think we will be all the better for it. So AI features, AI features. I don't think we need to talk about Fortnite today. I also don't think we need to talk about liquid metal on iPhones or foldable iPads. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that if any of that ever manifests. Small shout out from my side. The Apple Sports app is great, and it just was upgraded for the Soccer World Cup, which also now expands it to 90 more countries because some of these countries, Apple still doesn't have their regional soccer teams or whatever, or their regional whatever other sport, but because these countries will participate in some form or another in the World Cup, they now make sense to offer the Sports app to them. And I think the Sports app is just so well designed, it's so smooth, it's so liquid glass optimized in a beautiful way. It started a little bit as a joke, similar to the Apple Invites app. And while I still think the Apple Invites app is kind of borderline where it should be taken serious or not, unironically, I think the Apple Invites app is probably one of those apps that would be better as just like an iMessage tool. But the Apple Sports app I can now actually really recommend, and it is going to be how I will consume my information for the 2026 World Cup. Now, when it comes to actual Apple news, right? Not rumors, not leaks. Well, we talked about the dedicated Siri app. Well, but what about the Siri animation? And this is where obviously I think Apple kind of showed their cards. The Apple sent out new invites for the WWDC 2026 keynote, which is obviously June 8th to June 12th. And the logo is not the logo. The slogan is "Coming Bright Up," and we have already had leaks and rumors to that effect, saying that the new Siri animation, instead of the rainbow going around your screen, it's going to be a very glowy, very vibrant animation. Potentially, also use the HDR capabilities of your screen. And a lot of the new Siri is not just its dedicated app, but also its integration into the dynamic island. And the fact that this logo shows this super vibrant glow on the outside, it does the full animation. Do they link to this? No. We can open that up actually. Apple.com. There it is. This is obviously the Swift logo, and yeah, you can see the animation, right? The fact that throughout most of it, there's always something black, at least partially, right? Something dark. That to me suggests that those rumors about Siri being integrated into the dynamic island also probably also correct. The main thing, though, that this very much confirms is the new Siri Glow, which obviously is a change from the current Siri Rainbow. I think this is a better design for liquid glass. I think the current Rainbow clashes a little bit with that, but this also wouldn't work, in my opinion, before liquid glass that much. So it makes sense that it's not just a new Siri that's getting a new glow, but it's also happening after the introduction of liquid glass. So that's cool and all, but that's just an invite. Well, the last story I want to focus on is actually something that Apple dropped yesterday on us, and it's something that I wanted to stream about yesterday. It's not that. Jesus. The Apple Newsroom. Apple unveils new accessibility features and updates powered by Apple Intelligence. Yesterday was Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Apple usually drops these features, they don't drop the actual features, but they announce these features, pre-announce these features, however you want to word it, before WWDC, but then these features launch alongside whatever iOS, macOS, iPadOS version happens to be announced at WWDC. So this is basically our first teaser for iOS 27 and more that's coming officially from Apple. Apple unveils new accessibility features and updates powered by Apple Intelligence. That comma is grammatically not necessary, but optional. One thing that I guess the grammar tool could tell you. With Apple Intelligence, detailed descriptions and natural language navigation are coming to features such as VoiceOver, Magnifier, Voice Control, and Accessibility Reader. Basically, a lot of visual intelligence stuff is getting, first of all, it's very clearly getting an Apple version, not just something that you sent to ChatGPT or Google search. And that Siri AI thing will be partially powered by Gemini, whatever. But to you, it's going to be an Apple feature that's now powered by Apple Tech with fewer steps in between. And now it's also part of accessibility. So I also assume that some of the stuff you're going to be seeing here is also very much going to turbocharge features like visual intelligence in iOS 27. Apple also announced new features for controlling power wheelchairs with Apple Vision Pro and generating subtitles across the Apple ecosystem, which I think is, I think that's something that Tim Cook said, or was it Rene Ritchie? I'm not sure, saying accessibility features are features, right? Maybe you won't need them, or hopefully you won't need most of them, right? But that doesn't mean that some of them cannot just be of great use to you without any kind of impairment, visual or hearing wise or motor functions. No. Something like generating subtitles on any video right away, instantly. There's already something that exists a little bit like it, but something that potentially is faster, better optimized, better designed, higher quality. Give me. So let's see how Apple advertises it.
Titles, voiceover powered by Apple Intelligence.
So this is already trying to mimic the experience of using your phone with voiceover.
This is the water utility bill for Alex.
At home, a blind woman holds her iPhone over a utility bill.
The total amount due is 30.91.
The screen shows 6 p.m. as a text appears.
So these are features that by themselves, right, if you just think about them separately, right, you take a photo, you will know what you see, AI can analyze it. Again, visual intelligence already does it. This being faster, more optimized, more on device, at least partially, right? And now being integrated into features like voiceover, that helps.
Casey said, still good for 7? And sent a link.
She opens the thumbnail.
This is also something that I don't think Apple can show it off right now because it would show their cards too much. But think about on-screen awareness and in-app controls coming to the new Siri version. Think about her not having to tap any of that, right? Even if the phone helps you with that guidance, but think about her responding, hey, voice assistant, right? Just respond here with specifically in this thread, right? You don't have to even give context of like respond to this or this person. You'll just say respond blah blah blah, and because the phone knows it's already on the messages app and whatever, it can keep doing all that stuff. And because the new Siri will be much more powerful, it's going to keep all that context in mind. So this is an accessibility feature that's being advertised, but it seems to be part of something much bigger, in my opinion.
An image explorer.
A dining table set for 2 with white plates, silverware.
On-screen awareness with AI. Again, here what really matters is speed and accuracy.
And
Oh, that's in an hour.
Now she lays out similar shirts. She presses the action button on her iPhone and starts live recognition.
Which is the plain one?
the plain shirt is on the left side of the bed.
She runs her hand across a table, then scans another table with her iPhone.
Where's my keys?
Your keys are located on the far left side of the table.
The woman grabs her.
This also goes to the argument, and I've argued, and I still argue to a degree, that Apple doesn't really need a super generalized chatbot like their own version of Gemini or ChatGPT. But think about it. If your phone or whatever phone in combination with cloud can already respond to this kind of stuff for accessibility purposes, at what point would you not just also open up similar functionality to regular users, right?
Her keys and inserts her AirPods. On a city sidewalk, she uses a white cane. In a train station, she approaches a blocked-off elevator. Her cane taps the safety barrier. She raises her iPhone and presses the action button.
The sign reads out of order.
This is also legitimately where smart glasses would be a good thing. And in her case, she wouldn't need smart glasses with a display integrated. So in this case, these kinds of glasses would actually make a pretty good accessibility device, not having to lift up your phone. So I assume that could also be part of the marketing push if Apple ever launches smart glasses without a display.
South elevator with an arrow pointing to the right.
The woman rides a different elevator. On a platform, she walks across tactile paving. A train approaches. Now inside, the woman sits.
Casey says, so excited to finally meet you.
She smiles. Titles: voiceover on iPhone. Personal, private, powered by Apple Intelligence.
Yeah, so this is a good way to market Apple Intelligence. Give us a snippet of something new, present it in a very humanistic way. Obviously, as I said, none of the features here are too crazy, even by Apple Intelligence standards, but the better they are executed, the faster they are, the more we benefit. And of course, by the standards of Gemini, ChatGPT, this kind of stuff has been possible for at least 2 years or so. Apple today previewed a suite of accessibility updates that use Apple Intelligence to bring new capabilities to features users rely on every day, including VoiceOver, Magnifier, Voice Control, and Accessibility Reader. Apple also announced on-device generated subtitles for uncaptioned video content coming to the Apple ecosystem, as well as a new feature for Apple Vision Pro users to control compatible wheelchairs with their eyes. These new features, as well as updates using Apple Intelligence, are coming later this year. Starting today, the Hikava grip and stand for iPhone, an adaptive MagSafe accessory designed with accessibility at the core, is available in 3 vibrant new colors on the Apple Store. So this I can already comment on, because this accessory already existed before. It was quickly sold out. This is basically designed as a holder for people with motor function impairment. It also works a little bit as a stand, so that's practical. This is cool. You will have to do some research if you have health issues like that. Apple posted a small YouTube video on it. Maybe you can read up what else they say about this product. I'm not, despite my medical background, I'm not an expert on this kinds of accessibility options, but it's something that apparently was very popular the first time Apple released it, basically instantly selling out, and now they're committing to more of it. So that's basically covering this. Some Tim Cook comments. Then some comments from Apple's Senior Director of Global Accessibility Policy and Initiatives. It's very good, by the way, that Apple is not cutting back on any of this. Like, there's been a lot of stuff, like, I know DEI mostly focuses on, like, minority and women inclusion in jobs and stuff like that. But a lot of it cuts to DEI also has unfortunately come at the cost of accessibility stuff and people with special needs. It's very good that Apple does not seem to be cutting down on any of it. VoiceOver and Magnifier can explore more. For users who are blind or have low vision, VoiceOver and Magnifier can describe on-screen information or user's surroundings. Again, on-screen awareness. This is a feature that Apple has announced for Siri already. User surrounding, visual intelligence, but being actually conversational. And the thing that was responding to you was much different than the regular voice-over assistant. That was very much Siri, just from like a better new Siri. With Apple Intelligence, these essential tools become even more powerful. The Image Explorer in VoiceOver uses Apple Intelligence to give more detailed description of images system-wide, including what's in photographs, scanned builds, personal records, and other visual content. Obviously, if they're building this on top of Gemini 3.1 or 3.5, and especially if they also partially hand it to the cloud when needed, they can do a lot here, right? Sure, they will specifically mention photographs, scanned builds, whatever. Maybe it won't work as well with like running video that needs to be analyzed constantly or something like that. But Apple can keep expanding that list just with how AI is being fed and trained nowadays. With updates to live recognition, VoiceOver users can now press the action button on iPhone to quickly ask a question about what's in the camera viewfinder and get a detailed response. Users can also ask follow-up questions into their own words to get more visual information. So more natural language understanding, follow-up questions, again, Siri, Apple Intelligence, right? Magnifier uses Apple Intelligence to bring the same assistive exploration and visual description to a high contrast interface designed for users who have low vision. So this is stuff that's probably going to just work with Siri in the new app, but for this through Magnifier, you get the specific user interface that's specifically designed with bigger buttons, higher contrast. Nothing here is going to be like, oh, it needs to be visual intelligence for beauty. No, it's going to have large touch targets. It's going to be easy to read, all that stuff. Magnifier also works with the action button, so again, no matter what accessibility. This is also why I think that the action button needs to have different modes. Maybe not by default, but as an accessibility feature, right? It would really be cool if you can have a long press action button feature and a double tap action button feature. Hell, give us a triple tap action button feature on top of that. Users can ask questions quickly and get answers. Users can control the app itself with spoken requests, such as zoom in or turn on flashlight. In-app controls, right? You see all that stuff coming together. Personal context, on-screen awareness, in-app controls, app intent stuff, right? Voice control gets natural language. Again, something that very much benefits from better AI in the device, like better Siri. With Apple Intelligence, voice control becomes more intuitive than ever, using natural language to help users with a range of physical disabilities navigate iPhone and iPad entirely by voice. With a new flexible input, users can describe on-screen buttons and controls with natural language instead of memorizing exact labels or numbers. The option to say what you see is great for navigating any app, including those with visual layouts such as Apple Maps or Files, using intuitive language like tap the guide about best restaurants or tap the purple folder. This can also help users to overcome barriers when elements aren't properly labeled for accessibility. So this is something that, for example, in a third-party app with in-app controls could be exactly what you need. Why is my internet so slow on this website?
Tap the orange folder. Tap the beach pilot. Zoom in on solar.
Oh, right. Okay, good. So on-screen awareness here with something like visual intelligence powering it. Again, these are breadcrumbs for features that are going to benefit all of us. Accessibility Reader adapts even more. Accessibility Reader is a customized reading experience for users with a wide range of disability, from dyslexia to low vision. Actually, didn't know it was optimized for dyslexia. I always thought it was just for low vision, but hey, you always learn. And with Apple Intelligence, the reading experience is more accessible than ever. Accessibility Reader works on more complex source material like scientific articles, handling text with multiple columns, images, and tables. Again, better visual intelligence that's inside the new Siri and gonna benefit the regular consumer. Well, it also benefits the accessibility reader. On-demand summaries provide readers the option to get an overview of the article before diving into the details. And with new built-in translation, users can read text in their native language. So this is something that I have not seen leaked that much about, but like system-wide automatic translation, kind of how we have some of it with like writing tools a little bit, but it's not very automated. Given that this obviously works in accessibility reader, I would like if that was possible through photos and stuff like that. Obviously, with something like visual intelligence, it already does, but it requires more processing time. It's not as automated, so it would be cool if it was system-wide for on-screen stuff, for stuff you scan and take photos of. Users can read text in their native language while retaining custom formatting, font, and colors. So it works here in more complex source material, having columns here, images, and tables. Yeah, you can see it definitely simplifies it. And then, of course, you can read it out. You can change text size and everything. Really cool, but also this goes to show that something like Siri generating a note or a pages file for you probably isn't too impossible either. Generated subtitles for video. Again, a feature that I very much think will benefit everyone. While captioning solutions are increasingly common for users who are deaf or hard of hearing, subtitles for spoken dialogue are rarely available for personal videos, content shared by friends and family, and other media. With new generated subtitles, video can display transcriptions of spoken audio automatically when captions or subtitles are not already provided, including in clips recorded on iPhone, received for friends and family, or streamed online. I really hope it works even in an app that might never get updated for it, like YouTube. So it's not just in videos that have like the native thing. With on-device speech recognition, subtitles are generated privately and appear automatically for uncaptioned videos on iPhone, iPad, Mac, Apple TV, and Apple Vision Pro. So basically everything except every Apple device with a screen except for the Apple Watch. The appearance of subtitles can be customized in the video playback menu or in settings, which is already something that Apple does for subtitles while watching a movie or something like that. Let's watch this before we read it. Yeah, I mean, this is very self-explanatory. A powerful wheelchair control feature for Apple Vision Pro. For some people who use power, or I always think it's called powered wheelchairs, whatever, driving with a joystick is not an option, and alternative drive controls can be an essential part of independent movement. Right, because some of these people, maybe they don't even have proper finger function, definitely not proper arm function. So eyes, it is. Eyes, precision eye tracking is a part of many accessibility paradigms. Leveraging the precision eye tracking system on Apple Vision Pro, a new power wheelchair control feature offers users a responsive input method for compatible alternative drive systems. With Vision Pro, eye tracking doesn't require frequent recalibration and works in a variety of lighting conditions. The feature launches with Tolt and Lucy alternative drive systems in the US, with accessory support for both Bluetooth and wired connections, and Apple will continue to work with developers to expand support for more wheelchair drive systems. Yeah, it stands to reason that it's not going to be automatically retrofitted to every existing wheelchair, unfortunately, but if you're buying a model that supports it, that could be a big boost. Now, of course, Apple Vision Pro by itself is not an inexpensive product, but maybe your insurance company can pay at least partially for it. Who knows? This is also, we talked about a future with better Siri and everything and how this lays breadcrumbs. This could also be a good argument for cheaper Apple Vision Pros out there, right? The option to control my power wheelchair on my own is gold to me, said Pat Dolan, founder of Geo ALS and a member of Team Gleason Patients Advisory Board, who has lived with ALS for 10 years. So, a motor neuron destroying disease. With this new feature, Apple is developing life-enhancing technology for the people who need it most. Over the past decade, we've seen eye-driven wheelchair systems evolve in incredible ways. Leveraging Apple Vision Pro's eye tracking capabilities in this way is a huge step forward. So you can already see that this is not entirely unique, but combining it with a commercial headset like this is a huge step forward, according to this person. Tim Gleason is proud to support this initiative and excited to see the benefits it can bring to people who use power wheelchairs. And yeah, I've already talked about the Hikawa grip. Again, look up what it might be good for you. Apple has also posted some other stuff. Vehicle motion cues come to Vision OS, so that's while you're moving in a car, you have like these little lines that kind of move with the motion or anti the motion of your car, and now it's expanding from stuff like iPhone and iPad to Vision Pro. Vision Pro will also support face gestures for performing taps and system actions, plus a new way to select elements with one's eyes while using dwell control. So I'm not very informed on this feature, and that's why I won't comment too much on it. Touch recommendations provide a new way to personalize setup in iOS and iPadOS, made for iPhone hearing aids pair and handoff between Apple devices more reliably with an improved setup experience. Larger text support is coming to tvOS, so viewers who have low vision can increase on-screen text size to be easier to read. And this is again something that I don't even consider like a huge accessibility feature. I think some people will just prefer it, right? And this is the same slider that we've had in iOS for quite a while, and I'm really glad. I personally will probably increase the text size by at least one step here. And yeah, that's how it changes. You can obviously see that it changes the overall UI, which makes sense a little bit. So I'm probably not going to go the largest text, but just a bit over default. Name recognition, which can notify users who are deaf or hard of hearing if someone says their name, works across more than 50 languages globally. For sign language interpretation, app developers, a new API supports users in adding a human interpreter to an ongoing FaceTime video call. I will be very interested to see how it works and if this is AI powered. Kind of has to be, right? To create a human interpreter in between. Those with difficulty interacting with traditional game controllers can now connect to Sony Access Controller as a game controller. So this is something that Sony is putting out. Apple obviously has partnered with Sony multiple times on, for example, making their virtual reality controllers compatible with. Why do I only have the German website here? With Apple Vision Pro to make gaming on that platform a bit more first party, even though it's technically a third party accessory. But yeah, this accessory was designed with accessibility in mind. It's way better for people with motor impairments than a standard controller. And now it's being supported across iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. Again, it should also be supported on tvOS and VisionOS, because some 2D games should work there, but I assume that very few people actually game on those platforms. Users can configure the thumbstick, 9 built-in buttons, and up to 4 additional extra buttons or specialty switches to personalized layout. They can also combine 2 controllers for a deeply personalized gaming experience, and unfortunately also an expensive one, because if you're gonna look, this is $90. Having 2 of them will get a little bit pricey, but yeah, you can see all the customizing stuff that comes with it, right? Yeah, but basically this is our first big Apple software announcement for the year. Now, obviously, we did have new versions of iOS 26 and stuff like that, but this is a first big feature dump in a way. And I'm really glad what Apple is doing. I've covered this stuff as much as I can every year. I think last year I actually was really busy during around that time, right before WWDC. So I missed a lot of coverage for these accessibility features that came out last year. So I'm at least happy to give it the time of day that it deserves today. But I think that now is time to wrap it up. We can see if anything new has dropped while I was babbling on and on. Nope. 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 Again, I won't cover absolutely every other little small thing. Some of it I even mentioned in yesterday's video. then Apple is also getting just ready for WWDC in general, so they're giving out some App Store stats. We might cover that once we are a little bit closer to actual WWDC. Yeah, that's about it for today, guys. A 2.5-hour stream. Thank you to anyone who watched live. Even bigger thank you to anyone, of course, who commented. But as always, I'm just glad to be spending time with you. Now I'm really freaking tired. As I told you right before I streamed, I was coming in from work. I was absolutely under massive rainstorm, so I was really tired at first, but I kind of got energetic doing this, so I'm very glad to be here with you guys. But now it's also time for me to eat something other than just some sweet, nice strawberries. Thank you so much. As always, I'll keep making streams. Maybe I'll do one on Sunday, but probably more like next Tuesday. We now did 2 streams in a row, so 2 days in a row, so at least that helps. Yeah, but otherwise, as I always promise, I do these streams as much as I can. Obviously, I have to do my work, I have to work out, I have to deal with family and friends, and I have to find some time to just relax and do nothing for a while sometimes. So, but it means the world to me that any of you are joining live, any of you are watching afterwards, and of course, just as we're wrapping up, it would also mean a lot to me if you did a little bit more stuff like subscribing to the channel, liking the video, sharing it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment, don't just comment live, although that's of course very much appreciated. Also comment afterwards. Whenever you catch me live, you can leave a super chat or super sticker. That helps a lot. You can also become a channel member right here on YouTube or support over on Patreon. And of course, join me on Discord or on Twitter, or just keep watching these videos. And of course, the closer we get to WWDC, the more concrete I'll make my schedule, just so you guys know when to tune in. I know a big part of you guys sometimes not watching live is not only my unpredictable schedule, but also, yeah, the fact that you sometimes don't even know if I will be streaming for a week or not. And before WWDC, I will make sure that you know about as much about it as possible. And again, this is where connecting on Discord especially helps, because that's where I'll post this stuff. And this is where you can also just ask me and I'll just respond to you, which is probably the easiest way to deal with all that. But that's about it for today. I hope to see you guys soon and hope to talk more Apple, more tech stuff, whatever else will come up that's of interest of us. Maybe even some gaming stuff. There's a state of play announced by PlayStation for the beginning of June, which is going to cover games like Wolverine, which I'm very excited about. So while I'm not sure I will be live streaming that, I'll probably be giving more and more of that stuff some mention. And then WWDC will take us over. And then we'll have plenty to talk about. That's about it for today, guys. Thank you so much again. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.